Welcome to the Deal by Me podcast, where we ask guests to tell us your story. Hello there, this is Dr. James W. Smith, your host. We seek to transform lives by encouraging and inspiring. Someone encouraged and inspired this host, a former lawyer, gambler, inmate, and his life was transformed. The same could happen to you. So when you listen to any of the Deal by Me podcasts, please support this podcast with a donation or a monthly recurring amount for as little as $3. If you're viewing any of the podcasts on YouTube, please subscribe. To supporters of this podcast, we say thank you. Check out my encouraging, inspiring, and transforming books that can be found on Amazon. I'm available for speaking engagements, in-person and virtual seminars, so please contact me by Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. I have with me Jessica Morris, who is an author, spiritual director, and huge fan of Jesus. Her most recent book, Higher Power, reaches deep into the soul of every reader to excavate the crap that gets in the way of a personal relationship with their higher power. Her honesty and vulnerability invite the reader to let it all hang out in order to take the first step into freedom from the bondage of self. Oh, I love this interview, and I'm certain that you're going to enjoy it as we move into questions and dialogue with Jessica. Jessica, again, welcome to the podcast. And just ask if you will share with listeners a little bit about yourself and where you are located.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Smith, may I call you James?
That's fine.
I like to be on a first name basis with
Sure.
people I'm talking to. So thank you so much for having me here today. This is such an honor. It's always an honor for me to talk about this book and myself. I am very quickly to say about myself. I am the youngest of four children born to a Methodist minister back in the 70s and grew up in the family disease of alcoholism as well, and then became an addict myself. And through uh, a lot of help from others, found recovery. And today, there's a lot to it, a lot more than that, but a lot of which is in the book. But today, I am just a month out of working in a 30-year career that was never my dream, but it paid the bills for a long time. And I finally decided to take the leap of faith and try to go for it with my writing. And so I am now just trusting God that the next steps are going to take me to the place I need to go to help provide for me and my husband in what we're, hoping for our future. I reside in Pennsylvania, in the United States, and right now we're having our first snow, so that's pretty exciting. I mean, I could go on forever, but I'm sure we'll cover a lot
Uh,
more about me in your questions.
oh, yeah, yeah. I want you to know that I've read your profile, and you are the exact type person that I love having on my podcast because your story will obviously inspire, encourage, and hopefully transform some life who may be listening to what we are talking about today. I'm really thrilled with you. I'll be honest with you. I'm a minister myself. I
Mhm.
pastored for 32 years before retiring, stayed out for about 7 months. My home church lost her pastor abruptly, preached on that Sunday, had a heart attack on that Monday, 67 years of age. And they called me to come down and help out for a couple of months until they could find somebody. And I've been down there now for 15 months. So that's kind of, how things are. So I'm excited to talk to you. This is an amazing venture. First of all, I want to know your book. I've written three, and I always ask people there must be something on the inside that drives you, that make you say, I need to write. I need to share this. Uh, what is it that caused you to sit down and take that leap of faith to say, I'm going to write a book?
Oh my. Well, this
Yeah.
one in particular, I had gone to seminary part-time. Once I was in recovery for about I want to say it was about 15 years. I started in seminary, part-time study, not to become a minister or anything like that. I just really wanted to go and learn, which
Hmm.
kind of made my husband a little crazy because he was like, there's no job on the other end of this,
Hmm.
but he was okay with it when I explained to him, look, I can't say no to God anymore. God was pushing me to do that, and I needed to do it.
Hmm.
And so while I was there, I was getting a master's in theology, which you have to write a thesis
Hmm.
for that in order to graduate. And what happened to me is I had a bit of a transformation while in seminary in recognizing what I termed in this book and in my master's thesis personal eschatology. And as you know, I'm sure eschatology stands for is means the study of the end times,
Hmm.
basically.
Hmm.
And so growing up, the end times really scared me. I mean, I just had in my vision from movies and TV and things that were written, and even things you hear in church sometimes, the fiery end. And I knew for certain that I would never get picked to go with Jesus to heaven. I'd
Hmm.
end up staying in the fire. I mean, that's what I thought growing up. And so while I was in seminary and I was learning in the early days in Intro to New Testament about Jesus's way of speaking metaphorically about pretty much everything,
Hmm.
I thought to myself one day, what if he was speaking metaphorically about his second coming? What if he actually meant, when he said, I'm going to come back, what if he meant personally? What if he meant for me? He was going to come back for me or for you in because so many people I had met in my life at that point had transformational experiences where they were a completely different person, born again, even though that's not what they were saying.
Hmm.
Because in the world of recovery, not a lot of people talk about their specific higher power. And so, I just found it very interesting that people were very quick to accept that Jesus spoke metaphorically about things, but nobody ever talked about this.
Hmm.
And so I went and I started researching it because that's what they tell you to do in seminary. They said, go research it
Hmm.
and see if you can find anybody else talking about it. And I couldn't. I found lots of different forms of
Hmm.
eschatology, but I found nothing that said that it possibly was a personal thing. And so I started writing about it, and I ended up with a phenomenal thesis advisor that supported me, even though it was, I thought, a crazy idea,
Hmm.
and walked with me through it. It was very, as most people know, when you're writing a master's, it's really academic.
Hmm.
You're citing your sources, you're finding sources, you back everything up academically. And and my thesis was great. Of course, I got a great grade on it. I passed, I graduated. And then I'm not sure if you're familiar with the show The Chosen,
Hmm.
which it is a series about Jesus
Hmm.
that it's coming out with the fifth season in the spring. And it came out in 2020 during the pandemic. And the main thing that I used in my thesis was the conversation between Nicodemus and Jesus,
Hmm.
where Jesus is explaining to him that you need to be born again in order to be saved.
Hmm.
And I had studied that for 3 years. Like I'd read everything you could possibly read on it, or so I thought. And I'm sitting there getting to watch it played out in front of me. And it was amazing because what the writers did on the show is they add a little bit of dialogue that's not in the Bibles to help the person watching
Hmm.
understand more about what's actually going on. And I realized in that moment that I need to write more about my thesis because like I said, my thesis was very academic and I needed to put my personal story in it. And it sparked this idea to take in my thesis, I talk about Nicodemus, the Apostle Paul, and Lazarus, the raising of Lazarus. And what I did in the book, I took my story in recovery and my story of redemption, my story of turning my back on Jesus when he did come to me,
Hmm.
which is the very first thing I talk about in the book. Um, and then finally coming back to him, I weave my story in with those three guys from the Bible.
Okay,
And
Jessica, let me kind of interrupt you because I want to kind of make certain listeners can follow
okay.
us. Now, I guess what I want to find out from you, it did you write the book as a result of having gone through your thesis project, or was there something else that was pushing you to write it? That's the point that I'm trying to get to, right? Can you kind of answer that one way or the other, which or was it both?
Well, it was a combination. It was
Okay.
a combination of having gone through that writing process academically and doing all the head learning, you
Hmm.
know, and then when I was watching it being played out in front of me in this show, I got this spark from God that this was about more. I remembered saying to my thesis advisor when I first started working on it, he said, "What do you want this to accomplish? What do you want this idea to accomplish?" And I said, "I would love to be able to help one other person get over their fear of God. Because I lived in a lot of fear
Okay.
of God before recovery. And so that was the basic gist of it there. And then
Okay.
when I was starting to write the book, I realized it was more about sharing my transformational experience with people and letting them see that or sharing that it's not just about being born again and then everything's great. It's
Okay.
about a consistent, ongoing born again and resurrection.
Okay. I got you. I got you. Now, tell me this. When was it that you first recognized your desire to learn more about Jesus? Was this was this your growing up as a young person under your father? I mean, I know he was a minister. We asked talk a little bit more about that as we move forward, his problems,
Mhm.
but was it because he was in the ministry, or what was that point where you say, "Oh,
Um,
I want to learn more about this Jesus"?
you know what? I really loved Jesus growing up. I
Hmm.
could identify with him very much. I had a really warped view of his relationship with God.
Okay.
Because of my relationship with my father, I just assumed that Jesus's relationship was that way also, like that he was afraid of his father. I never really understood growing up that they were the same.
Okay.
And so I ran away. I ran away from the church when I went to college, when I got
Hmm.
away from my father. Um, and my desire to learn more when I got clean and I moved away from the substances, my addictions are food, alcohol, and the family disease of dysfunction, basically.
Okay.
And when those things were removed and I couldn't count on them anymore to sedate me,
Hmm.
that was the God-sized hole inside of me that needed to be filled with God. And I just started like grabbing for, I went on Amazon and I just put in spiritual books or,
Okay.
like
Okay.
anything.
Hmm.
And it took me back to Jesus because that
Oh,
was always my first love.
okay. Well, I feel you. So I'm asking these questions, not trying to, be antagonistic, but to just really get listeners to really see how you get there, see,
Yeah, yeah.
you feel. Uh, you know, one of the things that I got from your profile was that you grew up in a family and your father was a minister, but yet he was an alcoholic. Now that's I'm not surprised at that, because
No.
I know how those things operate. I I was a compulsive gambler in my life. I thought I was, but then I found out really that I was just afraid to fail. Okay,
Hmm.
and so there
Hmm.
are some things that we deal with. So I know what that's kind of like. So I want to know from you now, what was your experience growing up in this kind of environment?
Mm. Well, it was hard. And it's easier to talk about it in hindsight. When I was
Hmm.
going through it, we lived in a very small town,
Okay.
and most of the people in the town knew my father drank and smoked, but they actually liked that about him,
Mhm.
because then they could.
Okay. Okay. I
He was just one of the guys,
I get
and
that.
he and my mom were very good at, um, I don't want to use the word posturing, but that's, I guess, the
Mhm.
best description of on the outside, everything looked great.
Okay.
We were a happy family. And my father took out his frustrations and his anger when he came home. And so we took the brunt of that. My mother took the brunt of that. And it was a time when not many women left their husbands. It
Hmm.
just, I mean, the 70s and 80s, nobody was really,
Yeah.
not a lot of people were doing that then.
Mhm.
And my mom was an absolute lover of Jesus. And so I think she made her wedding vows and she was going to stick it out. Of course, I have all kinds of things that I could say in hindsight about that,
Mhm.
but that I'm not going to because this was their marriage.
I got you.
They did divorce after, I want to say they were married about 40 some years when they did finally get a
Hmm.
divorce.
Wow.
Yeah. Um, but so growing up like that, I basically just made an assumption. James, I do not remember anybody ever telling me this. Like nobody ever told me this that I can remember, but I made an assumption that I must be a bad girl and that's why God put me in this family.
Hmm. Okay.
I
Okay.
don't know where that came from,
Hmm.
but it was in there.
Okay. Okay.
And so
I can
yeah,
I can
that was growing up.
I I can sense that. I feel you from that viewpoint. I wonder, I guess you're amazing. I'm sitting here trying to just uh, pull all of this together because talking with you is so intriguing. And I know that you at some point be, became an atheist. Now,
Not an atheist.
now,
No, I was never an atheist. I always knew God
okay,
existed.
so maybe I'm saying this wrong. You left organized religion, but you
Yes,
didn't become an atheist.
correct,
Okay.
correct. Yeah.
So how are you making a distinction between that? You just didn't want to be a part of an organized religion, but you
Correct.
still had this belief. Am I correct? Okay.
Yes, I
Okay.
ran away from the church.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I always believed there was a God.
Mm-hmm.
I always loved Jesus. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I had a cross that I wore all the time. I knew
Okay.
Jesus was my best friend,
Okay.
always.
Okay. So what you did was just stop this going to church every Sunday because that's what you saw your father, you saw what he, the type of person that he was. And you at some point didn't want to be that kind of person and say, I'm in church every Sunday, but I still know the Lord. Okay. Now,
Right.
I understand that. I got you. Now, this is awesome today. I, I want to kind of stop here because I pastored for 32 years, same church. I started this podcast about 6 months before I decided to retire. And that's just from the pastorate. I knew I would continually be in the ministry. And as a matter of fact, I'm still pastoring now as interim. So, it's hard to get away.
Yeah.
But I did this because I didn't know that I would be called as an interim at any time, and I want to continue my ministry. So say, okay, let me look at doing a podcast where I can do something that hopefully will be encouraging, inspiring, and hopefully transforming. When I first started, I was going to just kind of start sharing my life story and talking about my books. But then, I started getting guests that had, oh, your kind of situation, okay? And it became so interesting. And what was very interesting about it, it gave me the opportunity to ask questions that I wanted to always ask. And that is, if somebody is out there now going through the same kind of situation that you went through, that's got uh this found themselves at church all the time, but at some point they just say there's too much. I don't know. I love the Lord, but I don't know if I can continue to take this what I would call hypocrisy. Okay,
Yep.
what would you say to them that would be encouraging, inspiring, and hopefully transpiring, transforming rather?
Well, for me, in my situation, I
Hmm.
had to go away for a long time.
Okay.
Um, and what I recognized in coming back, okay, and I
Hmm.
think that's the important piece, is that the people at the front of the church are just as much people as I am.
Hmm.
And the people sitting next to me in the church are just as much people as I am. And I need to remember that. And by that, I mean that if I am, one of the things that I learned early on when I put my substances down is that when I'm pointing my finger at someone else and I'm judging somebody else, there are three fingers pointing back at me.
Hmm.
And I need to look here first. What is wrong with me today that I'm bothered by something the minister said? Now, that's not to say that there are people in churches that are not deviant or, doing things that aren't Christ-like, or, I mean, because you're going to find that anywhere you go.
Hmm.
But what I've recognized is that when I step back and realize, do you know Corrie Ten Boom? She was in the Holocaust. She and her family had the movie The Hiding Place. She wrote the book The Hiding Place,
Hmm.
and her family were Christians who lived in Holland, and they hid Jews in their home so that they wouldn't be taken off to the concentration camps. And they were discovered by the Nazis, and her and her whole family were taken to a concentration camp, and her entire family was wiped out except for her. And she's written a lot, and she's passed away, but she had written a lot about that experience. And one of the things that she said was, this blew me away when I read it, and it really helped me. She said, if I can't forgive Hitler, for what Hitler has done, how can I expect God to forgive me for anything?
Mm, okay.
Because we are all, and that's not to say that what Hitler did wasn't wrong. It absolutely was wrong, right? Okay, we can all look at that and say, wow, he went way off the path.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, but it's my job as another human being to not judge others, but to accept them where they are today and discern for myself whether or not they're safe for me to be around. And that was part for me when I left the church. There was no safety there for me at that time in my life. You know, now my husband and I have found a church that we just love, we just love. We love the minister, we love the people. Are
Hmm.
we in a different place or has church changed? I think we're in a different place,
Okay. Okay.
and you have to be, for me, I have to be discerning about where I go.
Okay. Well, I guess to take that just a little further, and my time is slipping away. You said you're so awesome. I I guess I want to know if somebody has left the church, and I'm not going back. I just don't care for that what they're doing. I'm trying to get is there a word of encouragement that you would just say right there that would kind of encourage them to go back?
Well, what I
And
would say,
okay,
I would ask them, are you leaving because of the people, or are you
okay,
leaving because of Jesus?
all right. That's where I'm trying to get to. Okay, I got you. I'm
Yeah.
following you. I got it. So depending upon how they answer that would be how you would respond to them.
Right. And one of the
Okay.
things that I would like to say is that all the time, not, once I was in recovery, okay, so forget about the 29 years when I was in the addiction, because that was a mess.
Hmm.
But once I was in recovery, I started, and there's so many sources for this today. I started reading and listening to people who love Jesus. There are so many pastors who have podcasts. And so even though I wasn't going to an organized church, I was listening to people like, I don't know if you know Andy Stanley out of Georgia.
Hmm.
He's got a church in Georgia and he has a podcast called Your Move. And I started listening to that weekly. So that was my weekly church. Okay. The thing that was missing, though, that I discovered over the years, now that was a good long period of time where I was just listening to people. Um, but what's missing there is the community
Okay.
and the giving of service. And that's one of the things that I love about my husband and I having joined this local church where we live. There's all kinds of opportunities to volunteer in my community through the church. And it's wonderful because I'm meeting people in the church and getting to help other people. And that part was missing when I was just listening. But you know what? I had to just listen for all those years
Okay.
until my heart was ready.
All right. I got you.
Yeah.
Listeners, hang on just so for a couple of more minutes because this is a great interview. But I want to give Jessica the opportunity to share with you how you can contact her, get her book. If she will tell you the name of the book and where you can get it and get more information from her, I want to give her that opportunity to do that at this time. So, Jessica, would you do that, please?
Sure, sure. The book you can find on Amazon. It's called Higher Powered. It's Highered. People tend to forget the ED. So when you go into Amazon and you put Higher Powered and my name, Jessica L. Morris, and you should be able to find it there for sale. And I also do have a website where you can read more about what spiritual direction is, which is something that I picked up when I was in seminary, and also some other writings. I have another book that was published in 2014. It's a daily meditation book that you can find on my website. And I do a blog that you can follow there, and that's jessicalmorris.com. It's very easy. It's just my name.
Okay. Thank you so very much. Listeners, I hope and trust you got that information, and I think it'll be very beneficial to you. A couple more questions, Jessica. You've just been awesome. You talked a little bit about seminary. So, could you tell us what it was like to be a student in seminary when you had no organized religious affiliation?
It was honestly, at first, it was really hard. But what I recognized happening is I, Andy Stanley, this one minister that I do listen to, often references himself as a Christ follower. And so when everyone else would introduce themselves and they would say what denomination they were coming from or what church they were representing, I would just say, I'm Jessica and I'm a Christ follower. And because that was the truth about me, like that was
Mm,
my goal in life. And I think it also, I was there with a very open mind and open heart because I
yeah.
didn't have any one affiliation. I just was
Mm,
kind of like a learning sponge,
mm.
listening to everybody and wanting to learn whatever I could learn while I was there, just soaking it all in.
Very interesting. Very interesting. In your early years of recovery, when you first started trying to heal from past abuses, how did you keep from picking up your addictions again?
Ooh, at first it was stubbornness.
Hmm.
I'll show you I can do this kind of thing. But then a woman who was guiding me suggested a counselor in my area who helped people with addictions counseling and the family disease of alcoholism. And I did some work. It was about 4 years of work on my childhood, the abuses of my childhood with that man and in a woman's support group.
Hmm.
And it was just that's where the word excavating comes from in my bio, in my profile, because that's what we did. We excavated all that junk that I had been carrying around, which I also talk about in the book, um, for my whole life. And once we started to do that, you probably understand that it started to relieve me of that pressure that made me feel like I needed those drugs,
Okay.
that alcohol and that food and those quick fixes, because now I had space to allow God in.
Okay.
And with that, I don't need those other things
Okay. Great. Did you not talk about the need to get rid of junk in your life?
to get rid of.
Junk in your life, in your book, anything of that nature?
Oh, absolute. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
I go
Okay.
through
All
all my
right.
addictions in there and the family disease of alcoholism and
All right.
like
Okay.
that in the
I
book.
got you. Jesse, you've been a great guest, and I've enjoyed talking with you. And I tell you, I know listeners will appreciate listening to your interview. You've been awesome. And again, I want to just thank you for sharing today
Thank you so
with
much.
the podcast Deal by Me. There you have it. Jessica Morris sharing with us today. And until next time, peace and blessings be with each of you.